rough day at the office right there. But hey, you live and you learn, you grow. We're gonna find a way to get better from it. First, for a guy that had a bunch of quarterback hits, 5 sacks, you could see that it weared on him as the game went on. He didn't trust his protection. He was moving in the pocket too much. He was throwing off his back foot. He had some wide open guys, and just felt the pressure and never could get settled to be able to go through his progressions. So overall, offensive line wise, I was disappointed in how they played because again, you got it to games like this to come up here and play this defense that's going to play you in a 5-man front. You got to win in the trenches, and we did not do that. Like defensively, they played all 4 quarters. I felt like offensively, they continued to play, but their mindset, they kind of conceded the victory to Illinois, and that was disappointing. That everything that we're going to see on tape is fixable. And as I told them in the locker room, it wasn't about credit to Illinois. They did what they needed to do to win the game. But if you look at it, those first couple drives in plus territory, it was on us. It was penalty. We got a bad snap. We're snapping the ball over the quarterback's head, right? We're not doing what we're supposed to do in 5-man protections when we squeeze the A gap to make sure that we throw hot off the end. So just things that we drilled all week and showed them. But you got to stay locked in. And for those guys up front, this is a great lesson for them. They're still learning each other. They're still learning how to play together. And if you're a step too late, right, it's bad. If you're a step too early, it's bad. So you got to be precise, especially with offensive football. So all the things that I saw in the game are correctable. It's just a matter of making sure that throughout the course of the week that you have the right mindset from a preparation standpoint and understand that the separation is in the preparation. And obviously we didn't do a good job as coaches in having them prepared. And then I got to challenge the staff, myself, and the players all to make sure that we own the mistakes. That we don't point fingers, that we don't try and pass the blame on anybody else, but look at the man in the mirror. And if we do that, then we'll learn from this experience, and hopefully it'll make us better going forward.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Good Old Podcast. I'm Jackie Franchuli for Wahoo's 24/7, and it really isn't a good morning for Virginia football. And we heard it from Tony Elliott. He said it was a rough day at the office, and boy, was it a rough day. And before we kind of dive into recapping the loss to Illinois, they lost 24-3. Let's talk about one head coach in Virginia athletics that is not having a rough day at the office, and that is Coach Mox from the women's basketball program. Just a quick note, if you didn't know, she picked up another big local commitment. Kimora Johnson, a stud guard from St. Anne's Belfield, decided to stay home. She committed to Virginia on Sunday evening. This is quite a win for Coach Mox, who's also been able to secure Olivia McGee, a Louisa County product. And of course, Sam Brunell came home through the transfer portal. So she is doing quite the job for that women's basketball program. So I felt like I needed to start the podcast with some bright, shiny news before diving in to the game. Again, Coach Mox is doing stellar work on the recruiting trail, and she may not be done. So keep an eye on Wahoo's 24/7. It's certainly an exciting time if you are a UVA women's hoops fan, and if you're a UVA men's basketball fan. Keep an eye out too. So let's get into some football. It wasn't pretty. Let's bring up, if you're on YouTube right now, you'll be able to see the stats as I'm talking throughout the game. And if you're on Wahoo's 24/7, this stat sheet was available on the game thread and also in the final game blog post as well. So this was not a good day for Virginia football, because just when you look at these stats, 42 yards rushing, they averaged 1.4 yards per carry. They had 222 total yards of offense. That is the lowest offensive production since 2017. They had 3 points off of 4 takeaways. The Virginia defense forced 4 turnovers, and UVA's offense only was able to manage 3 points. All those 3 points came in that first quarter. They went 1 of 16 on third down, and that one conversion was a holding call on the defense where they got an automatic first down. So it was a rough day on third down. In that first quarter, they had 9 yards of total offense. the second quarter, they managed to move the ball a little bit better. They didn't get a score from it, but they managed to move the ball a little bit better. And they had 6 yards of total offense in the third quarter. It was a rough outing. If you watch the game, there was a couple of obvious storylines that came out of it. Obviously, one of the biggest storyline was the offensive line. When you look at the offensive line, they had a rough outing. Illinois brought 5 guys up front, and even when they only brought 3 guys, it Brendan Armstrong was throwing from his back foot. He just didn't have time. He had guys on his face almost the entire game. And even when he did have time, it seemed like some wide receivers couldn't get separation. And at that point, it seemed that Brendan Armstrong was a little bit rattled. It was something that, I have not seen from Brennan when I've been covering the Virginia beat. I remember watching him last season, and even when he had pressure, it seemed like he was comfortable getting out of the pocket to make a play or an extend a play, and I just didn't see that against Illinois. That was something that was, I want to say, jarring, but it was something that stood out to me. That was not the Brendan Armstrong that I was used to. He wasn't playing like himself. That was certainly evident, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that he didn't have time. He was sacked 5 times. There was 9 tackles for a loss, the defense for Illinois' defense, and there was 5 quarterback pressures. It's going to be a tough outing for any quarterback if you're facing that amount of pressure for the game. So the offensive line in the beginning of the game in the first quarter, they started with, from left to right, Mikhail Boley, John Paul Flores, Ty Furnish, Derek Devine, and Logan Taylor. About midway through the first quarter, they adjusted a little bit because they noticed, Coach 2J noticed that things weren't going great. There was a lot of mental lapses on that front. There was high snaps from Ty Furnish a few times. There's also penalties, false starts, that stuff that negated possible movement of the offense, moving the chains. It was negated by some mental absence from those guys up front. So he adjusted a little bit on the offensive line. He moved Logan Taylor from right tackle to left tackle. Then you had John Paul Flores still right there at guard, Ty Furnish at center. Then you got Derek Devine, and then you had Jonathan Leach. Now, this line, although it's comparative, it's they were a little bit better. I'm not saying they're stupendous, but they were a little bit better. And then, to be fair to Derek Devine, he did have some flashes where he was a good run blocker. I think that was one thing where he did have some good flashes. If you remember the long Paris Jones run that he had in the first quarter, that was a nice block from Devine. So there were some good flashes from some of these guys. The biggest thing when I was looking at this game was I was just asking myself, where's Noah Josie? He did such a, when he was asked to come in against Richmond, he was pretty stable. He was one of those guys that looked pretty consistent out there. So I'm wondering what it is. Obviously I'm not in practice. And everything we've heard about Noah Josie seems that he was doing great and progressing really well. And he had some times with the 1s too during practice and fall camp. He was one of those guys that, we were keeping an eye on because he had so many reps during the spring. And when you look at this, you're thinking, why didn't he come in? There was a lot of times when this offensive line wasn't getting any push. The Illinois D-line can pretty much do what they wanted. It felt like sometimes they had that first initial push and then they kind of let it go. They didn't. So it just felt like Illinois was quicker and stronger up front. That's all it really kind of summed up to. And actually, I'm going to take away the stats here just for a second if you're on YouTube. And I'm actually going to share another screen with you right now. And the reason why I'm doing that, and again, if you're a Wahoo's 24/7 subscriber, I do this every game day. I really try to rewatch the game. Here it is. I really try to rewatch the game so that you don't have to, or if you want to just, kind of go with somebody and rewatch it. So there's a GIF that you're being shown right here is of one of the plays in the first quarter that basically just sums up what happened. The Illinois defense just went right through the Virginia offense. There was no pushback or anything. This was Brennan Armstrong handing off the ball to Paris Jones, and Paris Jones didn't have a chance to breathe. It was like, if you count, let's see, 1, 2, that's it. That's how much time Paris Jones had it. So here we go again. Paris Jones gets the ball. 1, 2. There you go. He's hit. That's how quick this was coming at these guys. It just, and this was, it looked like Mikhail Boley was beat on the outside, as well as John Paul Flores. But honestly, everyone was coming. It was the whole front line and the linebacker. Everyone was coming up front from the Illinois defense. So it was certainly not the best performance from the offensive line. All right, so it wasn't the best day for Brennan Armstrong. He had no touchdown passes, and that snaps his consecutive streak of touchdown passes for Virginia. He was the school record at that point. He threw for 2 interceptions. He had 13 for 32 and 180 yards. That's not a typical Brennan Armstrong day. And when you were watching him, it felt like sometimes, although even sometimes where he had more time than he thought, he just didn't trust his protection. At that point, towards around the second, third quarter, you noticed that, where even when he did have time, he just didn't trust it. And he would stare down receivers. There was a couple of times where I was watching him, was like, you're looking right at Keaton Thompson, or you're looking right at Dontavian Wicks. These 2 particular passes I remember was because in the first quarter, there was this nice long pass that he completed to Keaton Thompson up the middle. And it was almost identical play on 2 other third down situations, one to Thompson and one to Wicks. And one of them, he was intercepted, and one of them was almost intercepted. And it was almost identical play, but you saw Armstrong stare down a receiver, and that's something you also didn't see much of that last season. So Armstrong was definitely off his game. There were times where he underthrew the ball. One of those was that trickeration late in the game where you saw Hollins to Thompson back to Brennan Armstrong, where he threw to Grant Mish, and Mish slipped, but also the ball was underthrown. These are all not what you expect from Armstrong. Last year, you showed an ability to throw in tight windows, and he just didn't seem comfortable at all against Illinois. I will say, though, that when you look at this game, it was like he was afraid to leave the pocket at times. And I know, I think from everything that we've seen and read and heard from the staff is they want him to be more of a pocket passer. And I just, the 2 plays that stood out to me is when he wasn't a pocket passer, when he rolled left. And then one of them was that big long reception to Lavelle Davis, where he rolled left and threw out. He came out of the pocket and made a throw. That was Armstrong from last season. That was the flash where I was like, okay, he's getting going. We didn't see much of that, which is a shame. I think that's something that I hope to see moving forward. And I know we've been kind of doom and gloom here. So I kind of want to shout out to one particular player, because I feel like he's been challenged so much by the staff and last week he didn't have the best day in pass protection, but he graded one of the highest in pass blocking this week. And that was Mike Hollins. He did really well in this game as far as pass blocking and protection. And that was a huge improvement from one week to the next. We always say that you see improvement from the first and the second game, and that was true for Mike Hollins. In the second half, when you watch the game, he was one of the few guys that was showing urgency. I think everyone can agree there was almost like a lack of urgency on this Virginia offense. The mindset wasn't there, which was, again, strange because we watched them last season and they were honestly like cardiac calves, kind of copying what the basketball team has done. You never counted them out. Especially if Brennan Armstrong is in, you're like, it's okay. Brennan Armstrong is in. They can come back from this. You never had that sensation against Illinois. But Mike Hollins was still leaving everything out there in that second half. And he had some nice longer runs towards the back end. And actually there was one particular long run for Brennan Armstrong that he had a very nice block that helped Armstrong get an extra yard. And actually was Dontavian Wicks that missed his block. If not, I think Armstrong would probably gotten a first down at that point. So he did really well. And actually, their best pass blockers and it was both running backs, Mike Collins and Paris Jones. They graded out the best according to Pro Football Focus. Again, we have all those grades and snap counts on Wahoo's 24/7, but those guys graded the best in pass blocking. So kudos to both of them, and especially kudos to Hollins because we've been talking about how much the staff has been on him and challenging him, and he did a good job on Saturday in that regard. So the one thing moving forward that when you look at what we saw from this game was how do you move forward from this? Obviously, there were some holes. Well, there was no holes there. They couldn't run the ball. But the O-line is what it is. Initially, when you looked at first at the O-line, you thought they can scheme around this. That's generally the first thought, especially with the playmakers Virginia has on offense, you think they can scheme around this. We didn't see much of Billy Kemp. Unfortunately, the only thing you remember from Billy Kemp was that muck punt that ended up in an Illinois touchdown. That's what you remember Billy Kemp for this game. So when you think of guys that can make an impact, you think of Billy Kemp in the slot. You think of Keaton Thompson in the slot. And actually, when you look back on film, you can see that there was some good success with Keaton Thompson in the slot. So I kind of wish there was more of those. I wish there was more jet sweeps. Wish there was more crossing routes. I miss more quick screens. But at the end of the day, if the wide receivers aren't going to win those one-on-one matchups, it's going to be hard for even those quick screens to do. But it looked like sometimes when they were trying to create something out of nothing, they were always in those first and long. They always either went for a run on the first down, which means they were second and long, or they faced a penalty and they were facing second and long at that point. So they always were on their back foot. And even when they weren't in their back foot, it felt like they were trying to do more of their running deep routes, which means they needed more time for the play to create. And by doing that, you're putting so much more pressure on Armstrong on that O-line. So moving forward, that's what I'll be hoping to see more of. Obviously, you want improvement in the O-line, but you also have to work what we have. So I think that's something where you moving forward, you might see some adjustment on this offense, or you expect some adjustment. But again, that was an all around game where there was just filled with mental lapses. Guys weren't in their spots. I saw a couple wide receivers running wrong routes. There were some arguable calls where, especially in that second half, about Demick Starling's probably had a good call for a PI on him, where he was being manhandled pretty hard, close to the end zone. That looked like a PI in my eyes, but it wasn't called. But those Illinois DBs were on them, and UVA wide receivers just need to win those one-on-one matchups. So a lot of things to work on the offensive side of the ball, which is not something we thought we would be talking about this season. Yes, we thought there was going to be some O-line issues that there was going to arise, but a lot of mental lapses in that game from several playmakers, not just the guys from the O-line. So we touched on a little bit about the offense. So we're going to take a quick break. And then after we get back, we're going to talk Virginia defense. Hello, and welcome back to the Good Old Podcast. I'm Jackie Frenchuli for Wahoo's 24/7. And we're recapping Virginia's loss to Illinois. They lost to Illinois 24-3. It wasn't quite the game everyone expected. I think a lot of us thought this was going to be a closer matchup than we got. We broke down extensively what happened on the offensive side of the ball. So we're going to now move and talk about the defensive side of the ball. So again, if you're on YouTube, I'm bringing up the stat sheet. Now, I know what you're going to look at, and you're going to say Illinois had 394 yards of total offense, and they had 198 yards rushing, 196 yards passing. And they were, Chase Brown also had 146 yards on the ground on 20 carries, averaging 7.3 yards. Yes, they had issues stopping the run. But to be fair, I'm going to here do a comparison of going by quarters. To be fair to the Virginia defense, If you were to have told me that UVA's defense had a interception and then had a fumble recovery and then had 2 3 and outs to start the game, you would not think Virginia would only have 3 points. I don't think that would be in anyone's thought process when you think of how this game was starting. And Virginia's defense had a very, very quick start, which is something they've said they were working on during fall camp. So they did enough to win. Yes, with the overall stat sheet, there's got to be improvements, and they need to adjust a little bit better against the run. When you look at a couple of the mismatches that Illinois heightened, especially with their tight ends, they noticed that mismatch right away and they utilize it. One of them was for a long completion, and one of them was for a touchdown. So you saw that Illinois identified a good mismatch on that defense. Obviously, Chase Brown did manage to run quite well against Virginia, but at the end of the day, what Virginia defense accomplished against Illinois was enough to win. I think that's what the main thing that I'm taking away from this is they did enough to win, and they did show improvement again from the first game. And I think that's all you can ask right now. Again, after the first game, I said that this was a work in progress. Obviously, there's a lot of work to do on the offensive side of the ball. On the defensive side of the ball, you're getting a nice, slow, and steady progress. During the first game, what I saw was a better secondary and a D line they needed to get a little bit more pressure. When you looked at this game and you rewatched the game, again, I see a secondary that did again very well. Yes, there was a couple of issues. Finchel Cypress was lost his one-on-one matchup in that long reception for just before Illinois scored again. And I couldn't tell from the TV angle. I didn't attend this game. I'll be attending all the other road games, but I couldn't tell if Antonio Clary was caught out there a bit. But Cypress did lose that one-on-one matchup in that situation. And again, that was just a wide receiver making a play. So there was that situation. But at the end, I think the secondary of Antonio Clary, Lex Long, kudos to Lex Long. You had a good game. Jonas Sanker and Anthony Johnson and Finchero Cypress, they had a pretty solid game. Especially those 3 safeties. When you look, they did make some impact. I think Lex Long had a very nice stop in the second half just before Illinois scored. But because of Aaron, that was in the second quarter, actually. Aaron Famui had his penalty, which is the one where he had a little bit of a meltdown on the sideline. That was negated. But Lex Long had a nice game. And this was a good thing to see because Darius Bratton was hurt. Darius Bratton didn't play on Saturday due to what a source says was a suspected ankle injury. So with Darius Bratton out, you're asking someone else to step into probably one of the most important roles in Coach Rudd's defense. So, and these guys did well. You had Clarion Long and Jonas had a pretty successful outing. So I think when you look in that secondary, you think this is where you see the most improvement on that defense. You still want your defensive line to create more havoc and chaos and create more push up front. Sometimes it felt like they couldn't shed their blocks, especially early in the game. But they did make some adjustments during the second half because I saw them make more pressure. You saw Chico Bennett and Camp Butler get to the quarterback a little bit more. You saw some things change in the second half when it comes to that D line. So I think what you see from this defensive line is you see their ceiling is a little bit higher. You see that by making some quick adjustments or just by getting them reps and by getting them more game experience, you're seeing them get better. Now, you obviously you want them to get stronger and bigger, but you can't get these guys get bigger. But what they have is they are improving. And I think this defense has potential. So I like what I saw from the defense. Again, they're not world beaters right now, and I know everyone's going to focus in on the stats at the end of the game. And yes, they need to improve against the run. They need to improve as a defense, but they have. I think that's the key is that we aren't seeing them go backwards. We're seeing them move steadily forwards. And that's all you want. When I looked at the schedule, I thought that Virginia had a chance to slowly progress throughout the first couple games. I thought Virginia had a chance to progress. Now, the offense took a step back, but the defense did not. So I think that's something that we can take positives from this was the defense did take some steps forward. So at the end of the day, it's just like Tony Elliott said, it was a rough day at the office, but there is a chance for them to grow from this game. They face ODU at home next, which on paper should be a game which UVA should win. Obviously, if you ask Virginia Tech, you should not take ODU lightly. But this will be a game at Scott Stadium where Virginia has historically in the last few years played well against their opponents. So Virginia is back home against ODU. And like Elliott said, I think a lot of the things that we saw on Saturday are fixable. Obviously, you're not going to get bigger in the trenches one week to the other. That's just not physically possible. So you have what you have. I think you can, again, I'm preaching this. I think you can scheme certain things around them, but you also need playmakers to make plays. You also need playmakers to get the ball. I think that's the end of the day. You need playmakers to make and playmakers to get separation. You need them to be mentally there for 4 quarters, but you also need to give those playmakers the ball. So Virginia is looking to bounce back against ODU on Saturday. They'll have a couple of recruits there on grounds for visits, and we'll have breakdown of who will be visiting either Thursday or Friday on Wahoo's 24/7. And we'll be back here with a new episode of the podcast on Wednesday. We'll break down main talking points from Tony Elliott's press conference on Tuesday. And then on Thursday, we'll have our big game preview again here on YouTube, as well as wherever you listen to your podcast on Thursday. So again, thank you so much for listening. And if you like what you're hearing, why don't you go ahead and subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcast and head over to Apple and Spotify and rate and review us. I would greatly appreciate it. And like I said, we'll be right back here on Wednesday with more on Virginia football as they hope to regroup against ODU on Saturday.